One of Australia's oldest wineries has a fascinating history, and many of the details have only recently come to light. Yeringberg in the Yarra Valley east of Melbourne was founded by a Swiss baron in the 1860s. But it also had a close association with the leader of the local Indigenous people. Tim Lee reports on an unusual, if not unique, colonial relationship.
The Yarra Valley in the ranges east of Melbourne has long been famous for its fine wine and food. To its traditional owners, the region and the river that flows through it embodies far more.
The Birrarung, the Yarra River that flows just out of town, is a very special river to all of us. Extremely special to the Wurundjeri. The Birrarung, as we call it, the Misty River. It's our symbol of our connection, physical and spiritual, to this land.
Perched on a high slope on Wurundjeri land near Lilydale is Yeringberg, one of the most distinguished and historic wineries in the region.
You drive up that drive and you see that old winery. And, you know, you walk into that place and it looks like somebody's just finished vintage, and yet, you know, the tools and everything were put into that corner in the 1920s. It's living history. It's amazing.
Yeringberg was established in 1862 by a Swiss nobleman, Baron Frederick Guillaume de Pury. For Max Allen, one of Australia's leading wine writers, the winery presents a captivating picture of the past.
Well, I've known the de Pury family and Yeringberg for 20-odd years. It's one of the first vineyards I ever went to when I moved to Melbourne in the early 90s. And I just was blown away by the history.
In colonial times, journalists and artists were frequent visitors to Yeringberg and the Yarra Valley. Many left detailed accounts of pioneering winemaking families such as the de Purys and de Castellas.
This Van den Houten painting, you know, from the 1870s depicts the harvest. It's been foreshortened massively, you know, he's tried to cram as much of the landscape as he can get into it. But I think you can get a sense for the gentle slope of Yeringberg, where the vineyard is been replanted. Just here, you can see all the pickers. There's a guy with a bucket on his back full of grapes. If you go to the winery, you can see those buckets and stuff. I mean, that's amazing.
In many ways, little has changed since then. For winemaker Sandra de Pury, harvest time is just as hectic as it must have been for her pioneering ancestors.
We're picking Shiraz today. Picking almost all the Shiraz. We picked some last week.
Yeringberg's grapes are still carefully picked by hand, and premium wines are carefully crafted in much the same manner in the historic winery.
I think the premium end of winemaking is generally hand-picked. We're only making tiny, tiny amounts of wine relative to most producers. And so we do every single little thing we can to make it as good as we possibly can. It's extra work, it's extra money, but it makes a better product.
Yeringberg is like a living, working museum. 82-year-old Gilda Pury knows every inch of its interior and seemingly every snippet of its past.
This is the old winery, what was referred to as the press room, and it was built in the mid-1880s as an extension of the wine exercise. There was an older cellar than this, which is attached to the building. And then they did an expansion in the 1880s and built this winery with fermenting cellars underneath.
But as wine writer Max Allen discovered, there was a far bigger story hidden in the extensive de Pury family archives. Evidence of an extraordinary friendship between the noble Swiss family and the local Wurundjeri people, most notably the great Indigenous leader and artist William Barak.
Before reading about Barak and the Dupuris, I had no idea that any of these kind of relationships existed. I was under the impression that, you know, the story of black and white relationships in Victoria in the 19th century was one of conflict and separation. I had no idea that there was this easygoing sense that Barak could just turn up one day for a cup of tea. And it is as everyday as that.
In his later life, William Barak painted his memories, many of them of traditional life before the coming of Europeans. But he also painted this image of Samuel Dupuri's vineyard. The work hangs in a Swiss museum, but when Max Allen saw it, he was spellbound.
So I knew that it was an important place, and then I, about 10 years ago, came across the painting that Barak had done of one of the Dupuri's vineyards. And I thought, I've never seen any Aboriginal painting of a vineyard, let alone one done in the 19th century, and that was when I thought, no, hold on.
Yeringberg is close to Corandurk. Nestled by the Yarra River, it's where in the 1860s the government of the day relocated the remnants of the Indigenous clans.
You know, let's not beat around the bush. The Corandurk people, a lot of them, did not want to be there initially. They were forced to live there. Their land had been dispossessed. Their numbers had been decimated. And here on top of the hill, you had the Swiss settlers who owned all the land around and were making a great go of it and building beautiful houses. And so there is an economic, a political, a social inequity here.
Max Allen's quest to learn more was aided by a creative fellowship from the State Library Victoria, and he embarked on a journey that would prove far longer and more rewarding than he could ever have imagined.
So you'll read something in a diary, you'll look at a picture, and you haven't found the connection between them, but then sitting down with one of these wonderful people, they'll say something that connects the two together, and you can put the jigsaw piece in the right place to paint this wonderful picture.
But it was interesting, the three big vineyards in the Yarra Valley all had different solutions.
The key link is Gilda Puri, whose first-hand knowledge passed down through the family was crucial.
Well, in my grandfather's time, that was back in the 1870s, 80s, he obviously had a reasonable association with Barak, who was chief of the Yarra Valley tribes, and he used to come over and visit quite a bit. And there's a few diary entries about that and some photographs showing them.
The two of them together, the oral history and the documentary evidence, and suddenly you're really piecing together this wonderful story.
Gil's father didn't marry till he was over 60 and was 63, I think, when Gil was born. Which meant that, you know, he's, in generational terms, at least one generation behind.
The Dupuris documented everyday life in vivid detail.
In the 1870s, the Baron Dupuri at Yeringberg had two sons, George first and then his younger son, Victor. And we're particularly lucky that Victor was very, very creative, very artistic. He wrote a lot, he drew a lot, and eventually did this wonderful portrait of Barak in the 1890s.
It's documented, and Max has taken the opportunity to talk to Gil and tie together some of the things that Gil can tell him and tie those in with some of the entries in the diary, some of the photographs, some of the letters, you know, all the bits of connections that people use to tie history together.
As luck would have it, Max Allen wasn't on his own. In recent times, the Dupuri family has given much of its extensive family archive, along with artefacts, to the nearby Yarra Ranges Regional Museum at Lilydale. They tell the story of this pioneering family, the wider story of European settlement in the Yarra Valley, and what life was like for the Wurundjeri at the neighbouring Corandurk Aboriginal settlement.
So we've got about 26 boxes of archive material that documents the intimate details of running a farm. So the day-to-day, goings on, the comings and goings, who's getting what, who's getting paid, where they're getting stuff from, who are they selling stuff to, who are they interacting with, who's visiting, who's staying, what family members are coming from Switzerland to stay with them and work on the farm for a 12-month stint. It's really extraordinary.
Max Allen's task was formidable. Carefully examining the vast array of documents, many of them written in French, took countless hours.
Can get quite tedious because it's the same thing every day, for quite a lot of it. Manuring, next day, manuring, men out manuring again, pruning the vineyard, pruning the vineyard, pruning the vineyard, pruning the... So it's anybody who's got a vineyard or a farm, it's a lot of repetitive activity. But you do get an amazing sense at the same time of the year coming and going, the seasons ebbing and flowing. And then you find a little reference to the story and it's like this hit, it's like a drug. You get this hit of joy and adrenaline.
In the late 19th century, the indigenous people from the Corandurk settlement were often employed to work at Yeringberg, especially at harvest time. For Max Allen, his biggest thrill was finding firm proof that the relationship between Barak and the Dupuris was far more than one of convenience. It was one of genuine friendship and mutual respect. The proof was in Barak's painting of Samuel Dupury's vineyard, the Baron's brother. He'd returned to Switzerland years earlier, but Barak still missed him.
Why is Barak painting this picture of a vineyard 30 years after he made friends with the man who planted it, and he's sending this painting back to Switzerland to somebody he hasn't seen for 30 years with this kind of very affectionate message at the bottom of the painting?
I am getting very old now. I can't walk about much now. William Barak.
Wurundjeri elder Alan Wandon says the friendship is obvious in the Dupury family photographs.
Normally it was Barak with a spear, with a shield or something. You got this little dark fella, one of our greatest leaders, and there he is mingling with the Dupuris, Baron Dupury, unheard of.
Max Allen believes that profound tragedy further drew Barak to the Dupuris.
So we know that he was already friends with the Baron. They've known each other for years. But when the Baron has these two boys, George and Victor, about the same time, a couple of years earlier, Barak had had a son called David.
David Barak was his son. He got sick. William carried him into Melbourne, around the Kew area. They took him to Kew Hospital. William wasn't allowed to spend time with him because he was Aboriginal, simple as that. And David died there. I believe that's the last of the male lineage. Thousands of years of male line ended there, as we understand. That broke William's spirit a bit, as it would any man or woman, losing a kid in such a way.
So whilst Barak was going through this incredible turmoil of having to stand up for the rights of his people at Corandurk and walk into Melbourne to petition the government at the same time as all this is happening, and he goes through this process of finding this incredible depth of resilience and fighting the system, his wife and his son die. Just a couple of months before this inquiry. And it's about that time that the diaries and the documents show us that his friendship with these two boys kind of got richer and deeper, and it's hard not to think that there's a connection there.
In 1899, Victor Dupury painted this portrait of Barak. Max Allen uncovered the very date it was done.
You have this amazing sensation of this legendary figure, Barak, this very, very important statesman, advocate for his people, incredible artist, who's just, well, he's there, so Victor, to Victor he's not, he's an old friend of the family, And that's the wonderful bit about it.
It was clearly a really strong friendship. This project has been fascinating to remake those connections with the local Indigenous community.
Max Allen's project was incorporated into this year's Melbourne Food and Wine Festival, where he gave a public lecture on his findings.
There's something about the informality of this photograph. The longer you look at it,
the more you are able to make out individual faces.
The packed auditorium included the Depury family sitting side by side with the Wurundjeri people of Corandurk.
More importantly, there was a sense that this kind of friendship was perfectly normal. It's been an absolutely wonderful experience that has allowed me to present this to you tonight.
Afterwards, in keeping with the spirit of reconciliation, Max Allen staged a dinner in Fitzroy. The venue was Charcoal Lane Restaurant, which trains Indigenous youth, and the menu were reflected the theme.
Tonight we've got a menu specifically designed for the area out in the Yarra Valley near the Corandurk. So we're concentrating on lamb, which is quite significant for the Depury family. We're using saltbush lamb as our main course, and we've paired that with some native fruit from the area. We've got native currants and some nice herbs and a really nice sauce with that one.
I think it's wonderful, for example, that some of Australia's most high-profile chefs are making a name around the world for utilising Indigenous ingredients in this harmonious way with, introduced ingredients, if you like. But obviously classic Australian ingredients like lamb.
Keep going. Hey! Who wants a beer?
Max Allen even had some beer specially made from Yarra Valley hops.
It was really important to have Shiraz grapes on the table because of the story of George hiring Corandurk people to pick Shiraz grapes in 1901. And we also had hops harvested that morning or the morning before in Healesville because the hops were an incredibly important crop to the Corandurk people in the late 19th century.
It was like everybody's heart was just filled with this amazing story of these wonderful people, William Barak and what he stood for, and then to appreciate his relationship with the Depury family, and all of a sudden we're all sitting alongside in a room sharing food that comes from this country that these families come from, sharing culture, and that's the food and wine is all part of it. I'd like to think that that's what William Barak did when he visited them at Yeringberg, that they shared food and shared stories.
Max Allen's project has won praise from all sides.
It's been, again, one of those wonderful journeys that, again, is so significant to Corandurk. And, I don't know where he pulls the energy from, but I know the heart and the passion's there, and just really want to say a huge thank you for that.
At Yeringberg, Sandra Depury now has a greater appreciation of her heritage.
It does bring it to life. I mean, you can read through the old diaries and see entries about, just day-to-day life back then, and then I can look around me and go, well, that was happening just here, but it was such a different world to what we have now. We're lucky to have all those documents still in existence.
At Corandurk also, there are hopes of reviving this once flourishing community. For the next few months, the Yarra Ranges Regional Museum will tell this amazing story in a special exhibition.
But we've also been given this story that sits alongside it, and all the characters who played a part in that important story that hopefully we can reflect on, each of us can reflect today and kind of go, that's what they were doing back then, and what can we learn from that and understand about relationships at that time.
So much amazing detail and richness to the story, and a connection to country.
Coming up, finding fresh food in opal country.
The further west you go and the smaller the community, the more challenges there are around access. So things like aquaponics, teaching people how to grow in their own backyards in those smaller and more remote communities becomes even more important.